Hi, it's time for some hope and possibilities. Hope and possibility for past post-traumatic stress disorder. What it really is, what do we need to do to recover, and why it is such an issue facing so many right now.
Dr. Gregory Jantz is a best-selling author of over 45 books and the founder of the Center A Place of Hope, voted a top 10 center for depression treatment in the U.S. As the pioneer of whole person care, Dr. Jantz is known as the messenger of hope. Now the nation's expert on anxiety, depression, substance abuse, relationships, trauma, and PTSD, here is Dr. Gregory Jantz.
Hi, it's Dr. Jantz. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a topic that, well, it's confusing. We think in terms of vets, we think in terms of war, and all that's very real. And a person who may be given a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder certainly has a diagnosis of depression and probably a diagnosis of some significant anxiety. So we put those together and we combine that with significant trauma. Maybe it's repeated trauma. Maybe it's as a child being emotionally abused. Maybe it is sexual abuse. Maybe it's significant loss or losing a loved one when you were young. Trauma comes in many forms. One current form, repeated cyberbully behavior. That's a form of trauma. As you look at this topic, let's look at this from a little different vantage point today, and let's expand our understanding. 70%, I'm seeing research right here, of adults in the United States, and it's probably higher, report that they have gone through some traumatic event in their life. All of us will experience a traumatic event. All of us. All of us will find ourselves at a place of loss of a loved one. We will find ourselves at times a victim of a crime. Things will happen in life. How we ultimately recover from that is the key. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, there is something called acute stress disorder, ASD. And I made a couple notes on acute stress disorder. A little different than post-traumatic stress disorder is that it's acute, it's stressful, happens suddenly, but it's a one-time event that you move through, you walk through, and symptoms are usually fairly short term. And it is a situation that you have a resiliency quicker, and you're able to bounce back a little quicker from an acute stress disorder situation, but you still may have some lingering symptoms. Still may notice that, man, I feel a little hypersensitive when I get around somebody that perhaps triggers an emotion for me, or a geographical place, or a smell, and I feel that again, that acute stress that hit me so hard. It's probably not disabling. It's probably not keeping you from doing most things in life, and you've learned to rise above, bounce back, and you find yourself more resilient. Acute stress disorder. Now, it could lead us down a path where you've got this, well, I'll call generalized anxiety. It's just now suddenly you're feeling a sense of low-grade anxiety that you haven't really experienced much of before, but it's kind of like it's always there. All right, let's look now, though, let's get a little more clear and look at what are the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. What are those symptoms? Well, I've got a good list, and you're going to find some say there's 17 symptoms. Others say, I think I read 22 different symptoms. Let's just look at these symptoms and look at them on a continuum from mild, medium symptoms, and of course, severe symptoms. Having flashbacks, nightmares, or where you find yourself mentally reliving a situation, usually through dreams, the nightmares, and it may not, if something happens, and it certainly was traumatic, this symptom of flashbacks, of being woken up by a nightmare, of reliving this may not happen right away. This could even be something that comes out weeks later, but the key here is it continues, and you find yourself easily reliving a situation. You may find yourself even suffering from some sleep issues, don't want to go to sleep because I'm afraid of the nightmares, the dreams, being woken up frequently during the night and going, what's going on? And just feeling disruptive sleep. I did work in sleep research, and I can tell you, of course, disruptive sleep over time has a huge impact on our mental health, our emotional well-being. So, but look at the reliving of the traumatic event, and this is something that happens over time. Now, there's another one, and this is related. It's going to call this number 2, where you feel really quite numb. It's the best way to describe it. I'm numb. I'm disconnected from the event. I feel the fear, but in some way it's so overwhelming that I disconnect or I dissociate. Okay, these are just some of the, if you will, primary beginning symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's a quick, honestly, there's a lot out there about it. It's a quick Google to look at all the different symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, how it can affect over time our immunity, how our body is, if you will, suppressed. We tend to get sick more often. So there's a lot as we look at the symptoms and the depression, the anxiety, how this can take us down the road of addiction, because I'm turning to addiction to cope, how I withdraw from relationships because I can't trust anybody. It's a predictable pattern. We can understand it. It's miserable. It causes us to think, how's life even worth living? And there's a general apathy about the future. You feel like I'm ruined. I'm not lovable. So you're going to feel that as a part of the post-traumatic stress disorder. Though I don't think I've seen on the symptom list of post-traumatic stress disorder the feeling unlovable, feeling unvalued, that really nobody's going to want me, unwanted. So these are important to look at. Now, you may notice, and this is just going to be number 3 here on our list. Again, the symptoms, if you look at all the symptoms of depression and anxiety, mix them together, you've got all the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Here on the website, aplaceofhope.com, I've got 2 fairly extensive questionnaire surveys. One's on anxiety and one's on depression. It lists a lot of symptoms, and if you do both of those surveys, you're really doing a test for post-traumatic stress disorder, because there's a lot of different symptoms. Number 3 that I wanted to mention, it's just this sense of heightened arousal, hypersensitivity. You just feel always on the edge, that you could be easily triggered. Hypersensitivity, which could lead to a hypercriticalness. It is a critical nature. You just nobody loves me, nobody likes me, I'm always irritable, I strike back at others, I have a hard time maintaining healthy relationships, nobody can understand me, and you put yourself separate over here, disconnected, if you will, or dissociated from others. Now, there are some real physiological issues we need to look at for trauma, symptoms induced by trauma. And remember, one significant event, exposure, so you don't have to be the one, let's say, that's the victim, but you could be exposed to it. That's still very, very significant exposure to a traumatic event. You witness something. You could also be the person experiencing the trauma. That's going to do it as well. So expand this. Sometimes people go, yeah, I saw that horrific car crash, or I was in it. I saw everything, but I was okay. And maybe you saw death. So we diminish really what that exposure could have done, and we say, I'm okay, and you kind of move on. Be careful about moving on. If I'm still having symptoms of this, I may be having the symptoms of depression. I may be having flashbacks. I'm going to have all the same symptoms, so it's post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, at times, I want to mention there is a form and type of traumatic experience where I really cannot recall the details. It's so traumatic that in some way my mind, my body, my systems were overloaded. And this is particularly true when we're younger. There's no place to put this horrific trauma. And so I disassociate, I disconnect. I know it happened, but I can't bring myself back to the detail. That's one way that some cope with it. The other way is I remember every, I try not to, but I remember every detail. I remember what was leading up to it. I remember what I was wearing. I remember the time of day. I could replay it in my mind very accurately. So we have those two extremes, and we're all different on how we deal with the trauma. And it is that's why I say it's very unique. We expand our understanding of post-traumatic stress disorder. We look at this is trauma. This is caring for trauma. And I probably have lots of symptoms. I'm hypervigilant. I'm constantly depressed. I want to escape. I don't want to deal with people. I don't really trust anybody. And so I'm at this place. Now, I'm going to say that there are different ways of treating post-traumatic stress disorder. We've all heard these. There's the CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is working on our thinking. And in the hands of a skilled clinician, we can really work on thinking, triggers, and really have a sense of, I can catch this and deal with it. But that's one component. I may need to deal with some deep trauma. There is EMDR, eye movement desensitization, and it is a form of working ultimately with the brain, and it is something that is for many very effective. We're always going to look at a number of tools in our toolbox, a number of interventions. For me, praying for wisdom on what is going to be the most effective to help this person. So what healing, we can teach skills. We can take people through a journey. There's a lifespan integration skills. That's a whole training that a therapist may go through to help you put together pieces of trauma over time and bring about some resolution. But we all know that there is something that it seems so big that I can't handle it, I can't get close to it. And this is where I'm going to say, and just from my vantage point, that there is really a healing that is supernatural. There is, I'm going to call it a God intervention. I've seen this, and I've seen folks who have walked through trauma so great, and they're walking now on a side that they will describe as freedom, forgiveness, a letting go, a sense of peace that I haven't had forever or for a long time. And so a part of the whole person allows for a spiritual perspective, spiritual help, help through our faith. A part of the whole person also is the cognitions, the cognitive behavioral, understanding how does the brain work, how can we rebalance the brain. There's a role, I do believe, for natural health care that can be supportive of the brain and the second brain, the gut, the gastrointestinal tract, which is referred to as the second brain. When we begin to bring balance in these systems, replacing nutrient deficiencies, rehydrating, and our body begins a process that you feel like something good's happening. I feel like I'm healing as this happens. And it feels like, wow, things are coming together. So I'm going to say, in our experience, and now we've just entered our 39th year, it's not any one treatment modality that holds the cure. It's the whole person, ministering to the whole person, so to speak, looking at all these different areas. And even looking at, there's some exciting things to look up called attachment styles, attachment-based therapy. There's what we call internal family systems. I made a list here of all the different options that are available. When there's addiction, that's got to be addressed. So addiction treatment, I love addiction treatment when it's blended in with the mental health, and we're attending to all that from a whole person perspective. I also believe that, and I've seen the brain scans, the SPECT scan images, and Dr. Amon's work in this area, that you can see a brain that's been traumatized, and you can see over time what happens when there's healing. Some of the experimental add-ons, if you will, there's even the hyperbaric oxygen, which is a whole area where we're looking at that more and more, and how do we support the brain and mental health healing. It's fascinating. So we want to bring together everything that can be helpful. We call it the why not. If we can do something as a part of the whole person that we know is going to have not a negative effect, there's no downside, then we say, well, why not? Let's put that in the mix. Let's do things that reasonably can be of support. That's where the nutrition and working with the good nutritionist and the natural health care, looking at how can I rebalance my body so that I can more effectively deal with the fear, the enormous fear that's a part of recovery from post-traumatic stress disorder. You're walking through very intense fear, and the anxiety, and can be panic attacks. All this can be quite overwhelming, and we must walk through that fear, and you realize, wow, I am stronger than ever before. I am going to be able to be more resilient. I'm going to be healthier in my relationships. So post-traumatic stress will take you down a path where I may struggle with relationships, the area of intimacy, feeling emotional closeness, feeling trust. All that's a part of the symptoms and experience of post-traumatic stress disorder. Let me mention just a few others to be aware of. There's something called intrusive thoughts. So if I've had trauma, I may suddenly feel like I'm bombarded by having thoughts that, where did these come from? And then they hit you. Of course, I mentioned nightmares. There's times where you may notice memory issues, not just memory issues of the event, but memory issues like, I used to have a better memory. I can't remember certain things. You may notice that your thought life has just gone sour. You've got a negative slant on everything, yourself and everybody else, which leads us to this anger and irritability. You go, where did this come from? I didn't think I was such an angry person. The difficulty in focusing for kids that have had a lot of trauma and a teenager, you go, it looks like attention deficit disorder because they can't focus, they can't concentrate, or have great difficulty because the brain is overwhelmed, or has been, and there are outcomes that come from that trauma when it happened early on. Let me just mention too that the hypervigilance. This is where I always am super sensitive. I'm always on edge, and I may find myself so on edge that my anxiety every day on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm on a 9, just waiting to be triggered to hit a 10. So, now, we also want to add one other, and again, do the quick search, lots of symptoms, but it's the exaggerated startle response. I'm just easily startled, and I may be more reactive than ever before. All right. So, as you look at this, can I really recover? Can I really get rid of all these symptoms? And what do I need to do? Allow for a whole person approach. Allow for some practice, work on that, find somebody that can help you through with the cognitive behavioral. I like to add DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. I know, if you've never heard, we have our own language, don't we? CBT, DBT, EMDR, you go, what is all this? And you notice how every profession has its own language. And I always try to say things out fully because it's important that we really understand what we're talking about. But you're going to probably have, it's like a slice of pie. Your treatment is going to be different slices. Some will be more. I may need more attention in one area. So I want to work with a team or clinicians that have different skills that are helping me put all this together. I am finding more and more the brain health, the brain restoration, the restoration of sleep, building the nutrition back, looking at are there nutrient deficiencies. There's even IV nutrient therapy. You go, what is that? Yeah, where a doctor can work with you. We put together a IV formula, and let's just say it's B vitamins or certain amino acids, calming for the brain, and there can be lots of reasons why my nutrition or my assimilation of nutrients because of trauma kind of got off. And as I feel better physically, I will be motivated if I feel better physically to keep moving emotionally. So that's an important piece. Again, it's the great bias of looking at this through the lenses of the whole person. There is no single magic pill. I know I hear the commercials for certain things, and I cringe a bit, thinking in some way it gives our profession a tainted image, in that there are so many promises or almost magic cures that are promoted for anxiety and depression, and it is not ever one single approach. We weren't designed that way. And that's why we need to be equipped. That's why with post-traumatic stress disorder, even learning what it means to release and practice forgiveness, what it means to really come to a place of how do I forgive myself? How do I forgive those that injured me so greatly? So just a few thoughts of all the different components that need to be in the plan, need to be in the program. And it's not a one, do this, and here's your treatment plan, and you will be healed. It'll take 10 years, but stay with it. It's not that approach. It may take a little time, and I want to get strong, and I want to be equipped then to go out and practice on my own, and I want to grow. I want to grow spiritually. I want to see how faith can enhance my recovery. I want to see how if I take good care of myself physically, I get good sleep hygiene over time, what difference does that make? Are my chemistries in my brain, am my brain kicking back in? Am I making my serotonin, my dopamine? Am I getting functionality? Is my thyroid working properly? Do I have hormonal issues? Low hormones, estrogen, testosterone. What's the role of melatonin in my sleep? A lot of times people with post-traumatic stress disorder we don't see the same melatonin levels, and that's one of the things that can help keep you asleep. So see all the different pieces and actually look at it. Here's how I look at it. I look at it as kind of a happy detective finding missing pieces to the puzzle. It's a 1,000-piece puzzle, and I'm going to keep putting in the pieces of the puzzle. I've got to allow the time to do this, and I'll get it down towards the end where I go, I feel like I'm 80% there. I've got a lot of pieces of my puzzle figured out, and things are going well, but I'm still not all the way there, and I'm still have some times of great suffering. Okay, that's where we rely on the skill of the team. That's where we pray for wisdom, because there's always missing pieces to the puzzle that we can keep putting together. It's the last pieces you might think are the easiest because there's only a few left. Sometimes the last pieces take a while. It takes a while to figure out what they are. And so that's what we're doing when we look at healing from post-traumatic stress disorder. And it is possible, and we can walk through it. It is something that is, I'm not going to use the word curable. It is something that I can live in recovery from. I can not only live in recovery, I can live in freedom. And that freedom looks like emotional freedom, physical health, spiritual health, and relational health. There is hope. Remember, hope always comes when there's a plan. And today, we're just looking at what are some of the different pieces that need to go into that plan.